It is July 10th. My name is David Quick, and I'm here at the Lamont Riggs Public Library with Guy Brandenburg and Josh Lewis. We're interviewing Mr. Brandenburg for the DC Gardeners Oral History Project, which is a project of the Neighborhood Farm Initiative and the DC Humanities Council. Guy, thanks for coming today.
You're welcome.
Josh and I are going to co-lead the interview. I'm going to get started, but then he's going to take over from there. Guy, could you begin by saying your name and your address?
My name is Guy Brandenburg, and I live at 1316 Randolph Street Northeast, not too far from here.
Okay. And to begin, Guy, could you just talk about the early days of your life, kind of where you grew up, family, neighborhood, things like that?
I don't remember when I was born. Most people don't. But I lived in Georgetown at the time. This is back in 1950 when I was born. And then we moved out to Clarksburg, Maryland until about 1961. And this was a farm. My dad was actually a professor, but his specialty was agricultural history. So he sort of wanted to practice what he was teaching, and we had maybe 20 acres and a number of beef cattle and chickens and ducks and occasionally a horse. And it was a great place to grow up in many ways, segregated like the other rest of the country was at that time. But we had kids at our school from many walks of life, some of them living and working on dairy farms and stuff like that. Our next door neighbors were raised turkeys that we got them from, and right next to us was a cornfield that eventually got divided up into a subdivision. Then around 61, they moved back into town, obviously me along with them. And although we had a garden, a vegetable garden out in the countryside, we didn't have one. We moved to Cleveland Park and didn't have a vegetable garden there. Later on, after college, I worked as a newspaper reporter in northern Vermont for a while, and my girlfriend and I at the time had a vegetable garden and a bunch of sheep and chickens and 2 or 3 horses, depending on whether you're counting whether the mare had foaled or not. And after that, one year, went to live on a kibbutz for a couple of years, and there did more commercial type farm stuff, like picking many tons of grapefruits and lemons and what else, clementines and so on, and ended up doing a lot of work with chickens and turkeys. Who were interesting to work with. When I moved back to the United States about 1974, my parents weren't living in the same place, but they were living still more or less in Cleveland Park, and there was a community garden like the one at Mamie D. Lee, but on the other side of town. And I felt like having a community garden plot too, so I applied after having helped my parents with theirs for a while. At some point along the line, I got married, and my wife had a plot too. And that was a pretty neat experience. You get to talk to a lot of other gardeners about, best practices and so on. The downside about having a community garden is that you are oftentimes liable to have your plot robbed of your hard-grown produce. I tell the story, I'd go out there one day and say, ooh, that eggplant's going to be ready tomorrow. Those 2 peppers and those 3 tomatoes make sure I come back tomorrow and pick them, come back tomorrow and somebody else has beaten me to it. And that's very frustrating.
Yeah. What was the name of that community garden?
That was the Newark Street Community Garden, I think is the name of it. It's right by the 3rd District Precinct, surrounded by what used to be called McLean Gardens.
Yeah.
If you know where that is. Yeah.
So-
It's still going strong. My parents have passed away.
Mm-hmm.
And so I found some friends who lived in PG County in Hyattsville who had backyards that they weren't using very much, and they sort of were interested in having a garden. So I said, this is better. One of them passed away, and the other place, the trees started getting so big that it was shading at least half of the garden. So, you know, you could grow lettuce and other fast-growing crops during the spring, but as soon as the trees leafed out, you know, forget it.
Mm-hmm.
You just, because vegetables need absolutely full sun, as you undoubtedly know. And so, you know, did that for, I don't know, 15, 20 years, long time, and got, you know, a fair number of vegetables. But I would find that, you know, since it was at least, you know, 2 miles away, I didn't go over there every day, and so weeds tended to get ahead of me. The production was pretty good, and the vegetables are often excellent. Definitely the tomatoes taste better than anything you get in any supermarket, and I think better than what you can get at the various farmers markets too. I think they taste better most of the time. But so I gave that up and stopped gardening at all for several years, I guess 3 years. And this year we decided to kill all the grass in our front yard. Front yard's not very big. It's maybe 10 feet by 20 feet, which is not huge, but big enough to plant several types of tomatoes, and they're doing great. We used our compost. We took one of the what do they call those giant green trash bins? What are they called?
The ones on wheels?
Yeah,
or?
dumpsters. No, they're not dumpsters. What's the name for them? Whatever they are. Super cans. Super cans.
Okay.
Yeah, so I made one of those into a compost bin by drilling a whole bunch of large holes into the side,
Yeah.
and just putting in all our, well, most of our, you know, stuff that we would throw out that would rot. Didn't put meat much in there because I figured that would attract all kinds of vermin. And we debated about other stuff, but so far it's doing great. You know, haven't had any tomatoes to harvest yet. Hopefully that'll come. They're huge. Some of the biggest best looking tomato plants I've ever had so far. Partly that's because it's been really rainy this spring.
Yeah. All right, so that's we've gone from Georgetown to Brookland.
Yeah.
Let's go back a bit to. It sounds like you were pretty young when you moved out of Georgetown.
Yeah, I was only 11.
Okay.
No, I was 2 when I moved out of Georgetown.
Right.
Right.
But your dad was an academic whose
Yeah.
field was agriculture. Where was he a professor?
He was at American University and Hood College, which is in Frederick, so living in Clarksburg was about equidistant between the two places at the time.
I see.
Later he became full-time at AU.
And was growing food part of his background? Had he grown up on a farm?
No, he had not grown up on a farm. He had grown up in New York City, and yeah, that was not part of his background, no.
So do you know what led him to that?
Exactly, no, not really. Though I know he talked about visiting his brother-in-law's place. So that would be my aunt's husband, who was 9 years older than he was. And they had some place on the James River, someplace in Virginia. He did spend some time working for the either WPA or CCC on the Blue Ridge Trail, Blue Ridge, what do they call that? Blue Ridge Parkway, that's what it was. But I guess it was just something he wanted to do, something that he found interesting. One of the things that he, was into was looking at people like, I think it's Thomas Young and people like Thomas Jefferson. The first name on that Young fellow might be wrong, but these were people who were consciously trying to do agriculture back in the late 1700s in a different way, getting their hands dirty and not using the same old agricultural practices of the past and using something different. I remember he was told by the other farmers, you can't, no way, for example, can you put cow manure directly on the fields. You've got to let it age for so many months, and he found it didn't make any difference. It was fine. Not all the experiments worked. He tried keeping some bees for a while, and
Your dad?
Yeah. And they died. I don't recall what the story was, but obviously his experience with beehives dying is shared by a lot of beekeepers today.
So you were growing food, the food that you're growing out in that garden in Maryland, was that just for kind of like a kitchen garden? Or,
yeah.
And
it was a hilltop farm and very rocky soil, as I recall.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And was your dad actively trying to pass on to you, and you had siblings, or?
Yeah, I had two brothers and a sister.
Were you all out there at work as well?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it felt like, us kids, I'm sure, like tremendously hard work, but it was also fun. It's really cool planting stuff, planting little seeds and seeing it come up. So with our kids, we also had them help with, gardening and stuff and growing their own little vegetables and so on. In fact, they even got their own little plots at the Newark Street Community Garden. And by the way, if you do get a community garden, do not, under any circumstances, have anybody rototill it to get rid of weeds, because what you have just done, if there is any wiregrass in there, you have made it so that you will never, ever, ever get rid of that wiregrass, because it will be homogenized and incorporated into every single cubic inch of dirt down to however far the tines go. If you want to get rid of the grass, just cover it with black plastic and let it bake in the sun for several weeks, and that will kill 99%. The other 1% you can pull out by hand, and you're done.
So when you say wiregrass, are you talking about? I think in our garden we call it Bermuda grass or crabgrass.
Not crabgrass. Crabgrass is an annual,
Okay.
and that you just have to prevent. Pick it out when it's small. It could be it's a type of creeping Bermuda grass. The exact name for it. Some people call it witchgrass or wiregrass. I don't know the species,
Okay.
and genus. I'm sorry, I just don't.
Oh, that's okay. We have something like that at Mamie that is invasive, to say the least.
Right.
And yeah.
The stolons go under the ground
Yes.
a long distance. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's really hard to get rid of. It's
Yeah.
true.
So I'll ask a little bit about Maryland, and then Josh will start doing some DC neighborhood stuff.
Okay.
But this was early 60s, late, like 50?
Late 50s and up through 61 that we lived on this farm. And
Okay.
like I said, our main thing was raising beef cattle, Black Angus,
Okay.
some of which we sold and some of which we used. So we always had a
And
freezer full of meat, all kinds of different cuts. It's not, you don't get tenderloin all the time,
yeah.
There's all kinds of weird cuts.
And what do you remember about the meat? Was it good, or compared to what
Well, it was good.
Okay. At that time, that's kind of before a lot of the countercultural movements had kicked off.
Right.
Or I don't know how much of a back to the land movement had started yet. Was that
No. I mean, he
your
was
parents'
sort of,
choice to do that? Was that kind of out there at that time?
that was unusual.
Mm-hmm.
And, yeah, it's, you know, I know some people are doing that now, and I certainly was interested in doing that back in the early 70s. So they were, I guess, ahead of the game
Mm-hmm.
in that respect. Yeah. Also, I guess I forgot to mention I spent time on a couple of, at least I visited a couple of communes in, I guess, 1971, one in Vermont, one in Missouri, and one in New Mexico. The one in New Mexico was such a travesty. It was horrible. I mean, they lived on, you know, on food stamps, it seemed, and used the money to trade with the Indians for peyote. I mean, they were just a bunch of, and the men did nothing. The women did all the work. I mean, it was just ridiculous.
Okay.
Just the, but you know, the other places weren't like that at all.
Okay. Well, I want to hear later about your experience on the kibbutz and also those
Okay.
communes. But when you're 11 years old, your parents moved the family back to D.C.
Mhm.
Why was that?
Probably because he was getting sick of the commute, and probably because he had a full-time job. And I think they also were discouraged by the fact that so much of the land around there already was getting cut up and turned into subdivisions. Like I mentioned, the you know, big farm fields right next to our house had turned into, you know, a group of 4 or 5 houses.
Mm-hmm. What is that? What is it like there now? What's
Uh,
the name of this place again?
Clarksburg.
Clarksburg.
Yeah, if you go out there now, it's just, you know, subdivision after subdivision, and just row house after row house. Although there are places that have been preserved by the Little Bennett and Little Bennett Creek Regional Park, I think is the name of it,
Mm-hmm.
which is pretty nice. I guess our old house, was sort of on the border of that.
Okay.
Yeah, it's pretty neat. You would go down there. I knew people lived down along Little Bennett Creek, and there was mills down there. And there was this one ford we could go across back in the old days when everybody had drum brakes, and, you know, of course, the brakes wouldn't work after that. And cars back in those days weren't made very well, frankly. I don't know why people are nostalgic about them. So ours rusted out in the bottom, and I like to look through this hole. You're going through a ford or whatever, and you see the water down there. But another nice thing about it is there are arrowheads that you could find in that particular ford. Right now, you cannot drive there. You can walk there, but that ford is no longer drivable. You know, they have a barrier up there.
Mm-hmm.
So we had also spent a year in France in 1959. This is part of his research, because one of the people who was researching was one of these, was a French liberal aristocrat who was involved in the French Revolution, but had to leave in a hurry when they started bringing out the guillotines, and came to the United States and traveled around. And so part of his project that still remains somewhat unfinished was researching his background in France and looking at his model farm that he had set up on his properties, wherever that was in France.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Do you have a sense of where your dad's research, I mean, were there any things particularly things that came out of it that...
particular insights?
Yeah, or methods, or...
Well, just take a lot of time researching, original sources, and try to decipher people's really, really bad handwriting in French, and understanding why the printed version had so many misspellings.
Mm-hmm.
And back in those days, of course, all research, your notes you write up very laboriously on a 3x5 or 5x8 card. So that's
Yeah.
so it's all written up, but never did get the funding to print the whole thing. Would have been 8 volumes with lots and lots and lots of footnotes. Excerpts were printed in the some local historical society, when this guy, whose name was Le Duc de la Rochefoucauld-Liancourt, came to the D.C. area and visited various people here, and was generally appalled by what he saw in Washington. Because this was 1792 to 1795. They had just surveyed the town in 1790, and so there was a handful of houses, and maybe they had started on construction on 1 or 2 buildings, but he was not very impressed at the point. He also went to George Washington's plantation, and Washington apparently was not there at the time, but he was sort of appalled by the conditions of the slaves there, as I recall.
All right, so family ends up in D.C. Let's talk about some D.C. neighborhoods and things.
So you said you moved to DC when you were 11?
1961.
Where did you guys buy a lot of your food? Were there big grocery stores? Were there farmers markets? Where did you shop?
There were essentially no farmers markets that I can recall. We got pretty much all our vegetable and meat produce at the local Giant, which is right on the other side of Wisconsin Avenue near Newark Street, which has just been torn down in the past month or two. Although we did still go out from time to time to Butler's Orchards, which is out sort of in, Clarksburg area, and pick particularly strawberries. But yeah, I don't think there were any, farmers markets back then at all. Don't remember any until much later, after I'd left home and was married and stuff. We found one in Tacoma Park. This was quite some time ago now, maybe 25 years, something like that.
Okay.
Would there have been a need for them at that point? I mean, the produce at the Giant.
It was so-so.
Okay.
It's okay. It's all right. It's getting worse, I think.
Oh yeah, no, I mean that's what I mean. Now it comes from wherever, but I mean at that time.
I don't know where it came from. I just really don't know. They have such economies of scale in the Central Valley of California, and it's just has so much sunshine, and if they can get enough water from the Sierra Nevada, I mean, it's just about perfect. They can grow all year round. And around here, you've got a very short growing season compared to them. For some things, certainly very few things can you actually get a full 6 months, 180-day growing season. With things like tomatoes, there's many of them are still going strong when the first frost hits out in, obviously in Central Valley, California. That doesn't happen, so you can get all these vegetables in the middle of the winter, and fruits and so on that you cannot grow yourself. Of course, you pay the price for it because it's been grown to withstand the ability to travel clear across the country, either in a semi-trailer or a train or an airplane, and so they have to pick it before it's ripe. Actually, I will take that back. One of the places we would stop for vegetables is, let's say we were going to the beach in Delaware or Maryland, across the Bay Bridge. A lot of times there would be individual farmers who would have a stand. Either they might have one of the kids sitting behind the stand, and they would sell, stuff, and we would usually take advantage of that. Also, if you're going up to Skyline Drive, which we had a pretty close family connection to, there were usually farm stands there, people selling things like tomatoes and cucumbers and corn, and later on in the season, lots and lots of apples. So those are things we like to do, but not, those things did not really exist much in the city that I can recall. And we did not go to the DC Farmers Market over on Florida Avenue. I don't ever remember going there.
Okay. So I want to ask you a little bit more. You said you worked on some large-scale commercial farms?
Yeah, on something that's called a kibbutz. They're an institution that's specific to Israel. They were sort of similar to collective farms, I guess, in Russia, but these were people who came together for the purpose of living in a communalistic, socialistic manner. And they have, I don't know, a couple hundred of them scattered around the country. They were originally at the borders in many cases to do two things. One, get Jews who came from Europe were basically forbidden to be farmers. They were allowed to be merchants or artisans or craftsmen or some sort of intellectuals. And when they came to Israel, they really wanted to say, we're going to be all the segments of the society. We're going to be the workers and the farmers and everything else, not just a strata of highly educated intellectuals and merchants and doctors and lawyers and stuff like that. So there was a, very much of a back to the land sort of theme, and this is going back now 150 years. And the idea was that the land and the property and so on was held in common. I was told by old timers there that when they first started out at this particular kibbutz called, which one was it, the first one? Ein HaMifratz, which is near Akko or Acre, which is a bit north of Haifa along the Mediterranean coast, that everybody would get the work clothes that was next on the pile, whether it was way too big for you or too small. So it wasn't to each according to his needs. You get the next one, no matter what, which is a bit excessive, to put it mildly. But they didn't do that anymore. But they did, everybody at the time ate in a common dining hall, and the kids were raised in children's houses, sort of like, you live at your kindergarten and your elementary school, and they would visit with their parents every afternoon. And on the Sabbath, this is not a religious kibbutz, this is very much of a secular kibbutz, but you did have, Sabbath off. There was only one day off a week, not 2 days a week like here. But it's really interesting. This particular kibbutz, they had fish ponds that I didn't work with, which basically they drained a large swamp at the end of this little river that never quite made it to the Mediterranean. And they grew carp and other fish like that in these ponds. And they had a bunch of cotton fields. They had dairy cows. They had chickens. They had a small, well, actually the main cardboard box factory for the whole country, which is actually a more interesting process than I thought it was going to be. Because, it's kind of interesting. You take these big rolls of paper, and then it turns into a box. You know, it's a complicated process, a lot of geometry involved. And let's see what else. They had lots and lots of orchards, citrus orchards. So I picked a ton of grapefruit. And by the way, grapefruit had these little tiny thorns that you can't see. And we had these little gloves, but you know, you'd end up with your wrists and lower forearms just cut with all these little bitty cuts.
On the branches or the fruit?
Yeah, it's not the fruits, it's the branches. You're reaching in and you're just basically plucking off the grapefruits, and then you'd put them into a bag and then take them to a cart, and they'd take them away. So, you know, we were in a program, my girlfriend and I, where we work 4 hours and then go to school 4 hours learning the language. So the work wasn't terribly hard. They didn't push us real hard. We didn't have a quota. You know, we were just expected to do a reasonable amount of work. I understand that, you know, when people do have a quota system like in fields here, then, you know, people really work at a breakneck speed because, you know, it's the difference between, you know, making $2 an hour and $10 an hour, how hard you work.
Mm-hmm. What was your motivation for going there in the first place?
I wanted to see what socialism was like,
Mm-hmm.
at least one form of it.
Mm-hmm.
That was and it was at the height of the Vietnam War, 1971, and they didn't call my number. That was during the draft lottery, which you two are, I'm sure, too young to remember. We don't have that anymore. And I was just, you know, kind of disgusted with the way things were going here. I had read enough in the newspaper to realize the dirty stuff that Nixon was doing. I had figured out, you know, that they had done that Watergate thing, and nothing was happening at the time. He was made to resign while I was over there. And I'd lived overseas, and it's interesting to see how people live overseas. It really is. And it was an eye-opener. You know, you have people using camels to drag a piece of an automobile, which is the plow. That would be Arabs on the other side of the Gaza fence, and growing, there's only a handful of crops that they could grow. They could grow barley for some reason, watermelon, almonds, and castor beans. Those are about the only things they could grow in these, you know, very sandy desert conditions, at least right there. There were other places where they had lots and lots of orchards for oranges for the most part. But it was really different how unmechanized, unscientific their agriculture was, as opposed to what you would see on a kibbutz. On a kibbutz, we had water coming from all the way from the Jordan River in the north to irrigate as much as we wanted, essentially. I don't know how they did the accounting and the bookkeeping. Apparently that's changed. I haven't been back in 40 years. I don't know how things are different. All scientific. They actually sent me to a class to learn how to set up irrigation systems and how to check the flow and the pressure and all this kind of stuff. Very scientific, and the Palestinians, no resources whatsoever. It was really something.
So did you bring any of that back, any of the techniques or like the irrigation thing or practices that you learned? How do you say kibbutz? Is that
Kibbutz,
how you say it?
Yeah. Some of it, but we don't. Here in the East, in any case, we don't need to do that irrigation stuff. We don't you can if you want to, but it's not really necessary. There, it's an absolute, essential. You only get rain 2 or 3 months a year, and the rest of the year is absolutely bone dry. And I know enough to know that, we don't have to do that, but there's a lot to it. I've learned that. I mean, once you start irrigating, you're really messing up the soil, because all the irrigated water has a pretty large amount of dissolved salts in it. Now, if you've ever had a plant in a pot that you've watered for quite some time, there's this sort of salt incrustation that ends up on the outside. Well, that's what's happening in the soil if you're irrigating, unless you spend a lot of money and use a lot of water to flush all that stuff out every so often. And that's what they didn't do in Mesopotamia back in, I forget what period of time, but that turned into a desert. It had been, very fertile, but they didn't know that you had to do that to flush all that stuff out. But it's a really complex thing. So the techniques for commercial agriculture are totally different from, backyard garden here on the East Coast. Kind of necessary if you was to live in California, say. I have, relatives who live over there, but that's different.
Okay.
Were people talking about organic food yet?
Yes. In college, and
Where'd you go to college?
I went to Dartmouth, which is in New Hampshire, and the idea of organic gardening was started, and I tried to do that because don't really like the idea of putting poisons on my food. The kibbutzim did not practice organic gardening in any way, shape, or form, not in the slightest. Just for example, I told you I worked with turkeys. This is on the second kibbutz, which was down near the Gaza Strip, as I sort of was implying. And let me start that sentence over. You start with day-old chicks. And turkey chicks at that age, you cannot tell from a duck chick or from a hen, rooster baby. They all look the same, little bundle of fluff. So turkeys have been bred to have really big breasts and not much in the way of brains. Wild turkeys are incredibly smart. I mean, they have incredibly good vision and hearing and smell, apparently, too. They can disappear in the blink of an eye. And you'll see them, and then you don't. You have no idea where they went. It's not like a deer. You saw it jump over the fence, right? But turkey have no idea where they went to. Absolutely silent when they want to. But domestic white turkeys are sort of notoriously stupid. So we would put them under a sort of a hood, maybe twice the size of this table here, which is say a 4x6 table. So maybe to put two of these together, and we'd have a hood with some heat lamps in it and sort of a little cardboard barrier around it, which was very much like we had when I was a kid raising little baby chicks for eggs and meat back on our farm. But with the turkeys, there was sort of a happy medium. Right in the middle, they felt it was too hot. If you went outside that, it was too cold because it was wintertime there, and it does get a little chilly there. So they would all sort of want to be right at the edge. So at the edge, you'd have turkey on top of turkey on top of turkey on top of turkey. And of course, the ones at the bottom couldn't breathe very well, to put it mildly. And you actually had to go there and stir them up physically every hour or so. And even so, a bunch of the ones at the bottom would die. So you'd have this wheelbarrow or something you put all the dead ones into, which is pretty gross. So they thought they had some sort of a I think, a salmonella infestation, which is, from bad hygiene and stuff. So they started giving them antibiotics. And then they all got better. And I said, well, when we stop the antibiotics now, because, that's not a really good thing to have in your turkeys. And they said, no, they grow bigger when you have antibiotics. And it's true.
Mhm.
It's true. They grow bigger. And it's not quite clear what the connection is. But there are some people who think that the current obesity epidemic here in the United States is because most of us, by the time we're like 5, we've had, like 7 or 8 courses of antibiotics for earache, for, tonsillitis, whatever. And that messes up your guts and makes you fat, makes them fat too. But they were really something. And we'd have this big long hanger, maybe as long as a football field. And before we put up fences, sort of dividing them into groups, if you started at one end and were going through to, say, check the watering devices or the feeding devices, and you ended up at the other end, you would realize that you had 10,000 turkeys following you because they have, they're genetically programmed to imprint on the first thing that's larger than them that they see falling around, because that's mommy. And so we were mommy. They follow us, and they'd get up to us and not quite know what to do, and they would peck at each other's wattles and so on. And of course, one of the other things you have to do in a situation like that when they're all inside is you have to cut off the top beak so that they can't do damage to each other. And that's pretty grim. Thousands and thousands of having the beak cut off with this hot wire sort of a thing. It stinks. On the other hand, if you let them outside, there are all kinds of critters that are just ready to eat them up. My sister-in-law lives in Howard County, and she got a number of beautiful chicken eggs and hatched them, and she's had, oh God, I don't know how many, I've lost count how many have been killed by foxes, raccoons, hawks, and I know somebody in Brooklyn, I won't say where they live, but because it's still against the law to, or let's put it this way, it's against regulations to have animals in most places in the District of Columbia, but they have some chickens anyway on the hush-hush, and just, I think 2 days ago, they lost about 5 of them to some animal that actually cut open the 2 layers of chicken wire and stole, killed, carried away about 5 little chickens. So.
Was it a human animal?
I don't think a human animal would need to open the fence, because it's easy enough to open the gate. I was thinking the same thing. But probably raccoon. They have photos of this raccoon stealing also fish from their little pond as well.
Huh.
So I want to ask you a little bit more. Did you say earlier that you dated a woman and you both had a plot in the same community garden?
No, that's my
And
wife.
then you ended up getting married. So did
No,
you?
we were married before that.
Oh, okay. 'Cause
I think.
I was gonna ask if you met your wife at the community garden, but I guess you
No.
No. All right, that's cool. So what year did you actually join that community garden? Do you remember?
I'm not sure. I'm going to say around 76, 77, something like that, but I'm not exactly sure.
Do you remember any of the particular people there that were there in the first years or so when you started?
You were in your late 20s?
Yeah, mid-20s. No, but if you gave me their names and their pictures, I'd probably, oh yeah, I remember that person, but I'm
Yeah.
sorry, I don't
That's
remember
okay.
names.
How big was it? I mean, how many people?
Oh, there was a lot. There were, I'm going to say, easily 100 plots Yeah, it's a pretty big place. It's like a full city block,
Mm-hmm.
a good-sized city block.
Was there any significant changes or events that happened during the time you were there? I mean, did they eventually put up a fence to stop people from stealing the food, or?
Well, I think the biggest change was that people got rid of the rubble. See, that site was the site of one of those World War I or World War II temporary buildings that lasted for many, many decades. And then when it was torn down, I forget what the original plan was. People just said they wanted to have a community garden. There was, I think, originally a rule that you had to grow vegetables. You couldn't just grow flowers, but I think that stopped. Actually, I have a little experience with a different community garden. So it's still going on, as far as I know. Every so often I drive by
What's
there.
that one called?
This one was called the Temple Garden. So it was right in back of the Masonic Temple on 16th Street.
Okay.
And
I don't think that's a community garden anymore, though.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. I was just there for 1 year. I teach at the Saturday science class at the Carnegie Institution, which is only a couple blocks down 16th Street. And we have the kids do all kinds of hands-on stuff, building telescopes, going canoeing, testing food to see what's in it. And this year we were growing stuff, and they grew paper whites and amaryllises, and we also planted a whole bunch of bulbs of all kinds of different types around the vicinity of that community garden. Then we discovered the next summer, no more garden, because they were taking it over after having generously donated it to the local, gardeners to use for pretty much for free for however many years. They said they were going to use it as a construction site, so that's no longer in operation.
The Temple Garden.
The Temple
Yeah.
Garden is gone.
So when was that they
A
took it back?
year or two ago.
Oh, very recent.
Very recently, yeah.
Huh.
Yeah, had been going on for 10 or 20 years.
Yeah.
So, I don't know if you mentioned earlier, are you currently gardening? Do you have a
Yes.
garden in your house? Or?
Yeah, it's in my front yard,
Okay, yeah, that's what you said.
and it faces south, and
Gotcha.
it's my
Right.
first time. I tried to find one in Brookland itself, but there had been one, but now that site had been closed off, again, for construction, all that construction near the metro station. Yeah, so that's where it had been, and so I was too late for that. And I sort of thought about there's apparently a community garden in the monastery, but you don't have your own plot.
Oh.
Yeah.
I'm not quite sure how that works, but didn't quite seem like what I wanted to do.
And it is cloistered in more than one sense of that word, that garden.
Right. No, I'm not a Catholic either, so.
Yeah.
So, what are some of your favorite things to grow? Do you grow mostly vegetables now, or flowers?
Well, my
or-
wife has been growing flowers around her house for a long time, and she's really good. It's beautiful. And we've grown a tree. We've been there for 30 years, and we put a willow oak in the front because we were thinking that the Norway maples were going to die, and it turned out they did. And so it shades our house, and it made such a difference. And we have things like lettuce and peas out back, which is towards the north. But you can only do that in the very early spring, because then the leaves on the other trees come out and shade it, and by the end of summer, September 21st, when you can still grow for quite some time into October, because first frost doesn't come till about October, sometimes doesn't come till well after Halloween. there's just way too much shade, you can't do it.
Mhm.
So this year, we've put one in the front, put a little bitty push in the ground fence, and so far it looks quite good. I've tried 4 types of tomatoes that I'd never even heard of before that a local, actually somebody in my community was selling. Let's see, something called a bird tomato.
This is Lori.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, you know her? Okay.
I bought some seedlings from her too.
Which ones did you get?
I got some bird, but they didn't make it to the garden.
really?
They were pretty fragile by the time I got there.
I was worried about mine. Mine's fine now.
Fabulous. That's
Okay.
great.
What else?
I got some purple Cherokee, kind of
Yeah,
heirloom.
That I've done many times.
Yeah.
It's okay. I didn't get that one.
One was called a black.
Black from Tula?
Something
Yeah, I
like
got
that.
that one. It's huge.
The favorite name of the one I got was called the Hillbilly.
Yeah, I got one of those too. And it's great. They're doing great. And a
Good.
persimmon as well.
Yes. Yeah.
And opalka.
Hmm.
Did you get that one?
No, I don't think so.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right. And then I got hot peppers. And I figured if anybody picks any of the hot peppers and tries them, ah!
Uh-huh.
Because, again, I want to keep my vegetables. I don't want to do all that work and have somebody make off with it. Now, a few little cherry tomatoes, that's fine.
Yeah.
But taking my nice, good-sized tomatoes, which take forever to grow, no.
So sometimes it comes up in urban gardens that people aren't crazy about the front yard food growing, and has that come up at all?
Well, one of my neighbors says, "Oh, you're growing vegetables here? I thought you were going to just grow grass." But yeah, I thought about it. I thought about, the vegetable gardens turn out to be ugly, but so far it's beautiful. I go out there, a couple of times a day, and I can pick up every single little weed. In fact, I have to look very hard to find any weed at all,
Mhm.
because we put down a lot of mulch. And that trick with the putting down the plastic and to kill all 90% of the grass, it really worked,
Mhm.
and without a whole lot of work. And turning the dirt over and adding a whole bunch of compost. So far, so good. People have, given me compliments on it. It looks pretty. I went to Home Depot to get those tomato hoop cages, and they turned out to have some that were multicolored. I'd never seen that before. Got an orange one, a green one, and a yellow one, and a red one, I think, as well as a couple of galvanized ones.
Mhm.
But so far, so good. No complaints. I think we have the prettiest yard on the block.
You're on Quincy? Is that what you said?
Randolph.
Randolph. Okay.
More.
Yeah, I was gonna ask. So you said that was the first time you've done it in your yard. So it sounds like you've
Our
gone-
front yard,
Your front yard.
yes.
So it sounds like mostly you've been a food grower in DC for most of the time that you lived here. Is that
Mhm.
true? Okay.
Yeah.
I was gonna ask if you longed for it, but your career was as a teacher?
Yeah.
Did you ever try to incorporate teaching kids about food growing in
I thought about it.
public schools or?
Yeah,
private?
public schools. Yeah, I
Uh-huh.
taught at Moton in Southeast, and Francis. They had a community garden, and somebody else was taking care of that, and so I let them, take care of that. I mean, I was busy with soccer and the math club, and you only have so much time.
Mhm.
Somebody else is doing it, that's fine.
Yeah.
And also when I taught at Deal, somebody else was doing a garden there for a while. But, you only have so much time.
Mhm. What high school did you go to?
Me?
Yeah.
I went to Phillips Exeter Academy and the École Alsacienne in Paris,
Oh, so not in DC.
not in DC. I went to junior high school here, but not high school.
Okay. And so when you were at the community garden up in north of Tenleytown,
South of Tenleytown.
south of Tenleytown, what was the makeup? This was in the 70s, early 70s?
70s and 80s.
Okay. What was did the makeup of the group using that garden change? I mean, was it middle-class white folk, like the people who lived
Yeah.
up there? Okay.
Yes.
And that didn't...
Yeah, there are a handful of blacks
Mhm.
and Asians and Hispanics, but overwhelmingly white,
Mhm.
middle-class folks.
What's at that community garden or others you've been at, was it pretty tight-knit group, or people leave each other alone,
Well, a lot of people are very social,
or?
and it's the sort of thing, if you see somebody working their garden and, you're curious as to what they're doing, what is this plant, how are you doing this, they will almost always, say, oh, yeah, I'm doing this because of X, Y, and Z,
Mhm.
and people will come over to you and ask you what you're up to. It's very loose-knit.
Mhm.
At one point, I was elected to some position on the board, and that's not something I'd want to do again. It's too much of a hassle.
Mhm.
It's not fun.
Yeah.
I mean, it's okay, but there's all kinds of administrative details, and you understand why most people do not step up to help run organizations, because it's not fun. I mean, if your thing is you really like to play, say, soccer or garden or, any of the million other things that people can do on their free time, if you're an officer, you spend your time doing everything but that thing. You're, negotiating, can you use this room for a meeting? Can you do all these other things? And of course, it's important. You have to have water, say, for your garden. You've got to have dumpsters to take away trash, and you've got to get wood chips and all that kind of stuff. And that's the sort of thing I did over there. But it's a lot of work. It takes a lot of time.
Mhm.
How was that access to the tools and water and stuff? Did you guys share tools, or did people bring their own stuff?
Well, that's a good question. Yeah, we had a fairly good supply of tools, and they were locked up in a shed. And I don't remember how we got access to it. I just don't remember, and I don't remember there being a theft problem either.
Mhm.
I don't recall. I'm sorry.
Did you bring your own water, or how did you get
No,
water?
we actually had taps,
Okay.
and I knew a little bit about plumbing that I'd learned on the kibbutz, as a matter of fact, and being a happy homeowner later on, so I was able to add a few taps to it. But in a place like that, at the end of the season, if you leave the water in the pipes, then the pipes will burst because of hard frost. So it's a complicated thing, which I didn't have to do, of forcing the water out with pressurized air, which is difficult. I don't ask me how you do it, 'cause I didn't do it.
When you were in the community garden, was there a lot of places to get seeds and seedlings, and a lot of garden stores in the area?
Well, yes and no. If you want sort of standard garden variety, ordinary seeds, you would go to, say, Benke's or Heckinger's back in those days when it was still around, or your local hardware store, and you would get whatever they had in store. And it wouldn't be a very wide selection of things. If you wanted a more unusual type of, tomato, like the ones we were talking about, you would pretty much have to order that from somebody else, from one of the many mail order places. And if you order anything from a mail order nursery, you will continue to be bombarded around January the 1st with catalogs coming in the mail. So, but a lot of people would buy, let's say, several packets of seeds. And the thing is, with these little gardens, they're not very big, 10 by 10, 10 by 20. 10 by 20 would be a big one, wouldn't you say? Wouldn't you say?
Yeah.
So, you could do 10 by 20 with 2 packets of some seed. but that means you only have 2 vegetables. You know, let's say carrots and, I don't know, a packet of squash? You could cover this entire room. And by the way, listeners, this room is what, 30 feet long maybe?
Yeah.
And 20 feet wide? Yeah, 1 packet of squash seeds could definitely cover that whole thing. So you're not going to use that whole packet. So what a lot of us would do is we'd get some and then we'd put the rest into little packets and we would sort of trade among each other. And then a lot of years I started my own, you know, tomatoes and peppers and eggplants and cabbages and broccoli and stuff like that inside, and get them ready on the front porch and then take them out to the garden. But even so, I would have extras. So a number of years I would sell the extras to people at the garden, or, you know, I would let word know at my school or at my wife's school, you know, we've got these plants, and would sell. So that was kind of a nice way of having somebody else take on the job of starting them, like Jody did.
Yeah.
Jody?
Lori.
Lori.
Do you, go ahead.
Well, I was wondering, in terms of buying, you know, some of those unusual heirloom varieties, I think of that now as something that's become kind of the thing to do again. I mean, at that time, was it harder to find that kind of thing?
Yeah, heirloom,
I mean, at any point
in
along
the
that?
70s, that was unusual. I mean, you get the latest burpee hybrid tomato or whatever that has all the letters after it because it was resistant to X, Y, Z, and so on. And you really started hearing about the more heirloom type stuff. That's been a lot more in the past 15 years, I would say.
Yeah.
And it's getting more and more. It's something that people look for in grocery stores too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you think, or have you even noticed any difference between, you know, say the 70s and 80s and now, between, you know, the number of people interested in community gardens or home gardening and small gardening, or do you think there's been an increase or nothing noticeable?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. Not being involved with a community garden now, it's hard for me to say. But I know there are people who are interested. But then again, there's more people who, you know, the idea of touching mulch, for example, you know, freaks them out.
So there's more people on both sides. Maybe.
Maybe so.
Is it, so you've lived in Brookland for a long time?
30 years.
30 years?
Yeah.
I mean, is that something that you have, do you have a lot of connections with other gardeners in Brookland?
Not tight connections.
Yeah.
You know, people on my block and a few other people.
And you go to Home Depot, do you go to Brookland Hardware?
I certainly do.
You know?
I go to Brookland Hardware, if possible.
Yeah.
I'd like for them to stay in business,
Yeah.
so I think it's important to, you know, patronize it.
Mhm.
There are certain things that they've been able to help me with that have been invaluable. Some of the people there really know quite a bit
Mhm.
and been able to help me with little construction projects. Oh, you want to do this? Oh, you take one of these and you connect it to this and then to this, and there you are.
Yeah.
And if you go to Home Depot, it's pretty hard to track down anybody, you know,
Yeah.
sometimes, and they don't know very much at all. This is my first day here. I don't know. You better go ask him.
Are there other businesses that stand out around kind of
Benke.
supporting your Benke?
Benke.
That's
out on Route 1
okay.
in past Hyattsville, almost. I guess you would say Beltsville.
Mhm.
There's a it's almost, I think, at 212. You go out, I don't know if you're familiar with this, there's a Costco out there, and there's an IKEA, just keep going,
Mhm.
and it's on the left. they almost closed that place. And that is a great resource. They've got a lot of people who know a lot about plants, and they've got a tremendous selection of all kinds of plants. They tend towards ornamentals. So we got actually some Asclepias and butterfly bush there, along with the vegetables there. And we also got the mulch there.
You have anyone?
I think for now,
Okay.
my questions, yeah.
Did
All
we miss anything? Is there anything else? Are there any other people that stand out in terms of people who taught you or mentored you, or you taught them, that stand out in your memory?
Well, you could talk to my daughter, but the problem is she lives in Oakland, is now working in Detroit on a movie, so pretty difficult to get in touch with her. But
But in
she's
terms
done-
of you, stories that you would tell about certain people, are there any that stand out in your head?
Oh, not really.
Okay.
Not really.
All right.
All right.
Thank you so
Thanks
much.
so much, man.
Yeah, this is
Okay.
great.
Hope this was at least says.
Mhm.
I forget what that really stands for.
Community supported agriculture.
Okay. And I went actually out to visit one that's close to Haymarket, Virginia, and went and looked at it. And I didn't particularly care for the selection of vegetables that they were offering, so I didn't join it.
Like,
And-
was stuff that you already grow yourself, or what?
Well, this was before I started our garden up again,
Okay.
because I was debating whether to do that or join a CSA and get.
Uh-huh.
And you know, we have a very nice herb garden already. You know, so we've got, you know, I mean, every herb that we like in any case. And part of their thing was giving you more herbs in pots, and we don't need that. And they also seem to start pretty late, so they started June 1st, and it seems to me, you know, March through June 1st, you know, March, April, May, you got 3 months that you could be giving people, you know, nice lettuces and peas and, you know,
Mhm.
radishes and spring onions, and for some reason they didn't operate that way, so didn't do it. I mean,
Do you go to the Brookline Farmers Market under the bridge?
I have gone there from time to time, but not very often, because it happens to sort of conflict with, you know, my work and
Yeah, it's
things like that.
Only on Tuesdays.
Only on
After work. Yeah, I
Tuesdays.
can't even go right
Yeah, I really like to go to the, we used to go to the one in Tacoma Park, which had a really good selection of things. The one downtown at DuPont Circle is even better. And so that's where we usually go Sunday mornings.
Yeah. One thing we didn't ask you though is, do you like to cook? Are you,
Oh, yeah.
I mean, what kind of stuff do you make, especially with the stuff you grow?
Well, I think I'm best at braising stuff
Mm-hmm. Yeah, nice.
and roasting stuff on the fire. I like to, I don't use charcoal, I don't use a grass grill, just season the wood and start the fire and let it burn down the coals.
Nice.
It really is nice.
Okay. Guy, can we